So let's try and figure out this parajumble question. If you were to take it from the top, as we usually do, and I can mark it for you here, there was one word which was common throughout the entire text, and that was accommodation, right? And then there was talk of this. Had you read it, read on the various sentences that were given, you would have come across this term, which was a theory which has been explained, which is the accommodation theory, right? And then if you were to read D, you would very closely connect to the fact that D offers a definition of this accommodation theory. So probably has to be earlier in the sequence, right? That is what we could say about D at least. But then anyway, there was another common phrase used here, and that was speech, right? There was talk about conversations, right? And that is also what was see here, even here in D it says conversational partner, right? So this is what the passage talked about. Now the fact is that there was another connection here very much visible, that one talks about this kind of convergence, right? I can mark it for you here. See, it says this kind of convergence, which means things coming together. And has he listed a lot of things somewhere? Yes. In B, he goes on to say the speed at which people talk, the length of both pauses and utterances, the kind of vocabulary, the syntax, the intonation, the voice, the pitch, the pronunciation, and so on and so forth. All of these are subject to the accommodations process. So what he's basically saying, that all of these come together to make the accommodation process. And isn't that exactly what it says here when we read about convergence? So we do know that there has to be a link between B and A, and we also know now for sure that B has to precede A, that there is a mandatory pair, and that is B and then A, right? So that's what we have figured out so far from reading A and B. Again, as I said, C talks about conversations and accommodation theory, but then we know for sure that before C we have to fit in D somewhere, which is because D is a definition of the accommodation theory. If you were to read it, see, it says the accommodation theory in linguistics, so it gives you the area of subject and says, starts from the premise that speech accommodation takes place when people modify their speech, right? So there was talk about modification of your speech. Is any such let's say sentence again talking about the way that speech is let's say modified? If you were to read on and come up to E, it says here, let me mark it for you. It says accommodation can be interpreted as a polite speech strategy designed to convey the impression that the addressee speech, and this is where is the important part. Let's say alternatively, accommodation has been observed when the need to be differential arises, right? So when there is a need for a change, that is when accommodation comes in, and this differential can be linked to right here where it says in C that sometimes there are radical speech modifications in women, that women display such speech modifications when switching from a formal interview situation to informal conversation with friends. See, so this is an example of that that switch or that differential need for the differential, that is when it has arisen. And therefore we can also say very clearly that there has to be a link between E and C, that there has to be E first and then C. Now let's try and figure it out from the options what we have right now for with us. We know that we created a mandatory pair between B and A, right? That's what we did. We have somehow figured out that D in the entire mix should probably be the starting sentence, right? And so that boils us down to very few options, actually just one option. But then we have also connected E and C so far, and that is how we come to the answer, which is A for this particular parajumble question. I can explain it once again to you in short. D is the starting sentence, since it gives you the definition of the entire accommodation theory, right? Then the adaptations which are mentioned in D are further exemplified in B, right? See, it says here the adaptations in D, the modifications, the adaptations, they are further given in B. The example of those is given. Then such convergence that they are all subject to accommodation process has been talked about it in A. A further discusses the topic. It cites an example to show how accommodation tends to occur. And then finally E discusses the situation when accommodation has been observed, that when people are talking to each other, let's say when women are talking to, there's a conversation, a change from a formal interview situation to informal. And then finally E, we know E discusses that differential need, and then C gives you the example, right? It completes the discussion. So that's how we have our answer, which is D, B, A, E, C.